Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MASSP's Leader to Leader. For those of you I haven't met before, I'm Wendy Zeded, the Executive Director at the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals. And with us today, we also have a few other MASSP staff members, Bob Kefchin, and we also have Colin Rittmaster, and we also have Ryan Casey running things behind the scenes for us today to make sure it all goes smoothly. We're also fortunate to have a panel of professionals who have served on the Governor's Return to Learning Council joining us for today's Leader to Leader session, and I will introduce our panelists in just a minute. I'd like to just go over a few of the features that we're going to be using today. If you moved your cursor at the bottom of your screen, you've noticed that the Q&A has popped up, and we have everyone introducing themselves in the Q&A, and I'm sorry, in the chat. And we will be using the Q&A function for actually posing questions. So if you want to just introduce yourselves, do that in the chat. But if you actually want to ask a question, make sure that you pose that in the Q&A. We have asked our panelists to watch the Q&A so that they may be able to answer kind of in immediate time. And some of those questions we may end up grabbing and asking at the end as time allows. If you want to vote up a question, you can simply click the thumbs up icon, and that'll allow it to kind of raise to the top, and we will keep an eye on that as well. So we're going to jump back, Ryan, I'm sorry, and we're going to do the panelist introductions. We're really fortunate to have with us today Joanne Clark, who's the principal at Frankenmuth High School and also a member of the MASSP Board of Directors. We also have Dr. David Hecker, who's the president of AFT Michigan. We have Brandy Johnson, who is the policy advisor for Governor Whitmer's staff. We have Dr. Elizabeth Koshman, who's from the University of Michigan, and she is the director of the TRAILS program, which is many of you are familiar with for student mental health. We also have Justin McCulloch, who's the Assistant Superintendent of Special Education Services at the Macomb ISD. And we have Dr. Bob Shaner, who's the Superintendent at Rochester Community Schools, and Josh Smith, who is the counselor from Western High School. So we're excited to have all of these different people join us today who have varying perspectives, which I think will be really valuable in terms of our discussion. We've asked each member that's with us today to kind of give us an overview, give us their thoughts on how did things go in terms of this work and how it came together from their perspective, and also to share with us what are the key things that are in the report from the perspective that they represent. So we're hopeful that that will give us a pretty wide range of information of what the report contains. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please pose those in the Q&A, and we will go back and look at those, and the panelists will also be answering those in real time and typing those answers in. So we'd like to get started as quickly as possible so that we can go ahead and make sure that each person has a little bit of time and that we also have some time left at the end for questions. So we're going to start with Brandy Johnson from the governor's staff. Brandy, obviously the press conference yesterday and the release of the report, I can only imagine for you that was like a big monkey off of your back. And you might actually get to enjoy your holiday weekend now. I don't know. I would imagine there's a lot of things still going on, but at least that gives you an opportunity to kind of get that out there and kind of get things up and running. So there was a lot of chatter on social media after that announcement, and I'm sure that you've already started, getting some feedback. So do you want to just share with us some general thoughts on, the statewide perspective on that return, and what do you think is also going to unfold between now and the actual return to school?
Absolutely. So good morning, and thank you so much for allowing me to join you today. I really thoroughly enjoy these MASSP webinars, so I appreciate the invitation. Yesterday was really big. It's certainly one of the most consequential press conferences that we've had to date around coronavirus, because we know how critical K-12 education is to the whole state, to the economy, to the day-to-day lives of parents and educators. And so we recognized how important the moment was, and so it was very thrilling to have it over with, and so that we can now start talking about implementation. So I would say from a high level, the thing that really stood out to me about this process is how grounded the process was in public health. We focused collectively on using science and data and all that we know about coronavirus to help inform the plan. And so the advisory council, of course, included educators, but it also included those with an epidemiology background, a pediatrician, an infection preventionist, 2 public health officers. And it was really important that we grounded ourselves in the reality that coronavirus is obviously incredibly dangerous and still very much here. We also collectively agreed at the process that nothing can replace face-to-face instruction, and that our collective goal should be to maximize the possibility that school is open face-to-face all year long, or as much as possible. And so as we were developing the roadmap, we kept that as a goal. We as a state have seen some significant declines in COVID-19, particularly fatalities across Michigan, but as you've heard recently, we're starting to creep back up again. And so as we look towards September, I think the message that the governor really wanted to convey is that we cannot let our guard down. We have to remain vigilant, and that if, as a state, Michiganders agree to be vigilant over the next couple of months as we head towards September, it gives us the greatest chance that we actually will be able to open for face-to-face instruction. The Return to School Advisory Council were heroes over the last 4 weeks or so. It boggles the mind to think that we only really had 4 weeks to put this together with the Advisory Council, which means they worked a lot. And so I am so incredibly grateful for the members of the Advisory Council. They really worked tirelessly and informed the ultimate recommendation for our safe and equitable return to in-person instruction. As I've already mentioned, it was a very diverse group, and they were both knowledgeable about the realities of the virus, about the realities of operating schools, about the realities of teaching and supporting students and children, but they were also incredibly passionate, and that was something that was clear throughout the process. We tallied up how many comments and pieces of feedback or additions and deletions on the roadmap, and we had, just from the Advisory Council alone, more than 1,000. And we truly did incorporate them line by line into the 63-page document that you all have now, which we, for shorthand, call the roadmap. They were inspirational, certainly to me, and I'm so grateful for their leadership and their willingness to serve. I don't want to talk very much longer because I want them to really share their perspectives. So again, we're very focused on putting safety and science and data and public health first, and that had to be how we grounded our decisions. The executive order that the governor signed yesterday, 2020-142, when I was right before the press conference, I told the governor, you just signed the 142nd executive order of 2020, and we're exactly 50% into the year. But the executive order really creates the legal framework for how schools can operate based on a phase 1 through 3 plan, a phase 4 plan, and a phase 5 plan. And basically where we landed is that, and the governor had previewed this before, in phases 1 through 3, schools will have to close for in-person instruction, or the buildings will need to close for in-person instruction. In phase 4, the virus is very much present, and we need to be able to have pretty strict protocols in place to mitigate community spread. And that as we hopefully get to phase 5 sooner rather than later for most of the state, there's some of the protocols, but ultimately we really wanted to ensure there's some additional local flexibility so that the plans can really meet the needs of community. So ultimately where we landed, I think, was a pretty balanced approach. All that being said, if we're able to get to phase 5, again, our goal is to stay in phase 5 until we get to phase 6. The way we can do that, the best way we can maximize the chances of that is if we remain strict about these health and safety protocols and ultimately very vigilant. And so we can't exactly predict, to answer your final question, Wendy, we can't predict exactly how the virus is going to change in the next couple of weeks or in the next couple of months, but I know the governor is going to do everything she possibly can to increase the likelihood that we start and stay in a phase of the pandemic that will enable in-person instruction. We also recognize that some of these recommendations and these requirements are not going to be easy to implement, but they're absolutely necessary. And again, they were designed to increase the likelihood that we keep Michigan schools open. We also know that these cost money. The timing worked out well that we were able to announce on Monday some newly allocated CARES Act dollars directly to schools to help their planning and implementation efforts. So that equaled $256 million. And at the same time, we continue to focus on all of our efforts on advocacy to the federal government to help with more dollars to help schools, both right now as a direct response to COVID relief, as well as we look ahead to the FY21 budget. So these decisions are hard. This was hard. I was so grateful to have the advisory council every step of the way. Their expertise was invaluable, and just know that we are collectively committed to keeping our children and educators safe more than anything else. Thanks.
Well, thank you for kind of providing us with that background and helping people to think about those things. And Brandy, hopefully you're going to stay with us, because I would imagine that some of the questions that pop up in the Q&A would be things that you'd probably, have a great answer for. So we really appreciate you being here. And as time allows, I might circle back, because I wrote down a few things as you were talking. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start with Joanne Clark, our principal from Frankenmuth High School. And we really appreciate Joanne being on serving and representing principals on this really solid work group. So from your perspective, Joanne, what do you think principals are most going to want to focus in on when they look at this report?
Well, I think I have to echo what Brandy said. This really was a very collaborative effort, and they did take all voices into consideration. So I know that I spoke for principals, but I was certainly also speaking for our students and others were representing different facets as well. But I know that every piece of input that we gave was considered. And so I really appreciate being part of this process. It has just been exceptional and eye-opening on how all of this comes together. And the amount of work, I know there are many of my colleagues who, probably most school leaders, who haven't stopped going and going and going since March 13th. And that is also true of Brandy and her team. They have definitely been working really hard. So I appreciate all the effort that they put in. My key takeaways and I guess recommendations: print out copies of the executive order and the roadmap and grab a highlighter and some sticky notes, and I guess use the documents in tandem. And I recommend that because there are some pieces in the executive order that are kind of clarify the timeline of when you have to have certain things determined and turned in. It also it kind of also alludes to that there's more guidance to come. And so these won't be the only 2 documents that are guiding our practice as we're planning for fall. We need to know that there's more information coming from MDE. In the executive order itself, it seeks to procure a waiver for some, if not all, standardized testing. So there is a line in the executive order about that. So I think somebody might have asked about testing, but that's a really common question. That's not addressed specifically in the roadmap, but it is addressed, and there could be more to come then from the executive order. The same is true with probably guidance from MHSAA, it sounds like, from what we have, ISDs and the health departments. So there's more documentation to come, but this should give us a place to start. For me, I guess, and it kind of goes back to what Brandy just said, I'm kind of focused on phase 4. That phase has the more stringent requirements. And if we can live in phase 4 and still have in-person instruction, we can then be a little more lax if we get to phase 5. It's kind of like classroom management. You want to start strong because you can always relax a little bit, but you don't want to try to go too lax and then try to tighten it back up. So my basic, I guess, suggestion is if you can focus on phase 4, you're going to be well prepared to be able to navigate between if we have to go back to a phase 3 and a closed situation, or if you're going into phase 5 and can be a little more lax. I guess my first and foremost item is plan with student and staff safety at the front of your mind, as we usually do. That's really what this is about. So how do we get our classrooms and buildings ready? What are the expectations? So you know that there are masks involved. There is information there about class size and cohorting, and it strongly recommends the 6 feet of distance, even though it doesn't require the 6 feet of distance. But again, back to why having that executive order in hand is important is because there is a line in the executive order that schools will need to identify and address in their plan any strongly recommended items from the roadmap that we decide not to do. So we do need to have reasons and rationales for why. And some of those rationales may be, and the reason that leniency is in there is because we know different schools are different. It's not one size fits all. And there may be some things that some schools can do that other schools can't do. But kind of just thinking about the building pieces, the traffic flow in the hallways, maybe using backpacks instead of lockers if you can't have congregation at lockers. Staff and student training, there's some information in there about making sure that you're telling staff and students and training them on hand washing protocols, on to minimize the spread of germs by coughing into your sleeve or into your arm. And then, of course, instruction, planning for in-person instruction, remote instruction, and some combination of the two, depending on what phases we end up in. So I would say that there's a lot in there for principals and for school leaders to consider.
Well, thank you, Jolynn. Just that little bit that you gave us had my mind going and thinking about all the different things that need to be included. So I'm sure that we'll end up having future leader to leaders kind of sharing, what the plans look like and kind of making sure that collectively we're kind of sharing that thinking. So I really appreciate you and your perspective. So let's go to David Hecker, and Dr. Hecker is the president of AFT Michigan, and there were representation with Dr. Hecker and also with Paula Hebart from the MEA on that committee. And so what are your thoughts from a teacher perspective? I'm sure there are some overlap with Jolynn, but what do you think are the key elements? You have to unmute, David.
Listened before when you asked us to mute, so thank you, Wendy. I really appreciate being invited to be part of this panel. And you're right, a lot of what I'm going to put a check mark next to, a lot, if not everything, that Jolynn said. First off, Brandy, as Jolynn said, Brandy thanked the council, but Brandy just did a tremendous job. We've all been in a position of staffing these councils or staffing committees or staffing task forces, and we really, really appreciate that work. We did a poll of our members, as the MEA did a poll of their members, and no great surprise that the results were awfully similar. Our members want to go back to work. They want to be with the kids, but their number one concern is their health and safety, students' health and safety, everybody's health and safety. And so our members, teachers, and support staff appreciate that this roadmap was really the foundation, as Jolynn said and Brandy said, science, facts, data, is really what drove this. I've already received some questions from people. Why was this recommended and not strongly recommended? Why wasn't this required? Et cetera, et cetera. And, part of it, and Jolynn sort of said this in perhaps different words, is, we had to figure out best practices in the world of reality. And reality is things are different in different places. And the hope is that, even if something is strongly recommended at the local level, the district leadership, the educators, and if there are unions present, the unions and the community should be getting together to figure out the local plans together. And if together they think a strongly recommended piece should absolutely be done, they should do it if that's what best fits their situation. A key, though, our members believe is that these plans need to be done collaboratively. And in some instances, some of these aspects of these plans, actually, if there's a union involved, need to be bargained. Things, impact of health and safety and things like that. We have questions as to how will enforcement work, right? A high schooler who has to wear a mask doesn't wear a mask. What happens? No teacher or support staff person wants to be in the role of the enforcer. There are many questions about special education and the need for specific protocols. And I'm not going to go into depth about that because Justin's going to speak a little bit later, and he knows far more about special ed and the challenges COVID presents when dealing with our great special ed kids. But there are many, many questions from our special ed teachers. If there's a hybrid used, how do we make sure that the education in the classroom, or I should say it the other way, the distance learning education matches as best it can the teaching in the classroom, right? I mean, as Jolynn said, and I think Brandy said, nothing replaces a teacher in the classroom in front of the kids teaching. Nothing replaces that. But to the extent that there will be some hybrid, because we all know, we've seen the polls, we also know, some parents are not going to send their kids to school. How do we make sure that the education a child receives through distance learning is as strong as it could possibly be? People have done a fantastic job in the last 3-4 months, administrators, teachers, support staff, etc. We have to keep that going and build on that, so we don't have some kids getting this, some kids getting this. I sort of mentioned the enforcement piece, that we don't want to be enforcers. But as we work through this and the guidance, as Jolynn mentioned, that will be coming, what will teachers be responsible for? I mean, beyond teaching, obviously. What will teachers and support staff be responsible for as far as the implementation of the plan? And teachers are people too. So, the normal, the expected question is, how does this impact me personally? And there are many issues that the governor just did a great job of over the last 3 months in dealing with through executive orders that have to be dealt with again as we move to implement this. Standardized testing. We think it should be totally waived for this year. That impacts teacher evaluations and school accountability, the third grade reading law. How are we going to deal with student count? Our thought is the student count from last year should be the student count for this year, as far as how money comes down, hours and days, the 75% attendance rule, and so many more. We have a lot of questions about those, which I know the governor and her staff and legislators with all of us will be working on to address. So like everyone else, the number one concern of our members is everyone's, not just theirs, everyone's health and safety, and balancing that with the real need to get back into the classroom as long as it's healthy and it's safe to do. So, our members, again, I personally appreciate being on the council. Our members, I know, appreciate that we were represented on the council. And, you know, we look forward to working on the kinds of things Jolynn mentioned and Brandy mentioned, the protocols, the guidance, etc., that has to come from this point as we move towards the actual opening up of school. So thank you again, Wendy, for asking me to join the panel.
Thank you very much for your perspective. And I think so far we're hitting a home run, because everything that the two of you have spoken about are things that I know are on the minds of really all educators out there. So let's transition to Dr. Bob Shaner from Rochester Community Schools. And Bob, what do you think from a superintendent's perspective are kind of the key points?
Well, wow, that's we don't have enough time for that, but good morning, everyone. First of all, a big shout out to Brandy and the entire team. I've done a few things over the course of my professional life, and this is probably in the top 10 of things that I've done to serve the greater good. It was extremely productive. It was not easy. It was a lot of dialogue and a lot of discussion about logistics, a lot about context and complexity. But the really cool thing is it was all student-centered and staff-centered to make sure we keep everybody safe. And I think that's a critical component to this. If you were to ask me to describe this problem in one word, I would say complexity, 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 complexity. And I say that because to David's point, there's so many questions about what staff members expect, what they're expected to do, how we keep them safe, and the same goes for kids. And there's so many unintended consequences. For example, while we're sitting here, I just got an email from a mother about hand sanitizer and being 60% alcohol and how it's going to affect her child's eczema. You know, we all have those types of things, right? But the thing that I think I'm most proud of for this process is that it was focused and founded on science. The discussion was focused on kids and keeping folks safe, and I think we came out with a really good work product. But it's a work product. There's so much more to do. I know folks are feeling a lot of anxiety. I don't know how you couldn't in this environment, but I think it's important that we lean on one another, ask those questions, and really have the patience, grace, and space to consider an answer together so we can move forward together. The key components for me as a big picture leader, what are the things that I need to make sure I execute? And cohorting and masks are the two largest levers I think we can pull to mitigate and keep people safe. So we'll be focusing on that in our district. A lot of it really depends on your local context and what you can logistically stand and what you can afford. But we really focused on keeping it broad enough so folks could adjust based on their local context and their local needs. Not only based on the phasing, but also again what you can stand locally. So I don't have a lot more to say than that, Wendy. Besides that, I was really proud to be part of the team and honored to serve on it and continue to serve on it. I know we have a lot more work to do. We've work to do on assessment. We have work to do on seat time waivers. Certainly, resources are a concern for everybody. But I think we have a good starting place and some really great guidance to move forward on. I was on a call before this with a group of superintendents from some smaller school districts, and I think this really this had a liberating effect on them. They really felt like they were planning in a vacuum up until now, and now they have some direction, and they seem a lot better this morning. So, and thanks for the opportunity for MASSP as a former member and high school principal. It's great to be back.
Well, I might circle back if time allows, because one of the things that I think is going to be challenging for superintendents is balancing some of the flexibility and local control aspects of the plan, and how you want to implement something and getting pressure from the community, maybe on things that, decisions that you make and policies that you want to enforce. So I'd like to circle back with you if time allows. Ben.
Yeah, and thank you. And I would just say one other thing, communication and engagement and education are going to be critical in this, because enforcement never works in a high school setting without those things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So we are going to go to Justin, and we really appreciate you being here and being on the panel, because I know, prior to the report coming out, there were many concerns about special education, and you certainly have a lot of expertise in that area. So what are your thoughts from that perspective? What does the report have, and maybe even what is the report missing that you know is going to be kind of ongoing?
Well, thank you, Wendy, and it's an honor to be here with MASSP. And I like the fellow panelists. I want to thank Brandy for all the work that she's done in her team. And I also want to thank the governor for having a council to help advise and give input. I think that was unique compared to, at least from what I've heard from other states. Special education is, there's definitely a lot in the plan that I think is a great start to, and it's been, it's in the plan. That's the big thing for special education. There's many times where special educators feel like they're not necessarily, it's an afterthought, maybe, special education. But the panelists and the fellow council members, everyone was passionate about all students and, what's safe for the students and the staff, and many, not just myself, mentioned, don't forget about our students with disabilities. I think the plan is a good starting point. Of course, we're going to need other guidance. We have a unique population of students with disabilities from birth to age 26. The roadmap says K-12, but we still have students that we service to 26. We have students that are out in the general education the majority of their day, but then we have that unique population that, like for facial masks, they're not going to be able to wear it. We have students with either medical conditions, or we have students with severe sensory issues that they may be able to wear a mask, but they may not. And we have to have that flexibility. And I believe the plan, and along with future guidance that will come out, will help educators with that flexibility. Special educators are rule followers. So it's nice to have, a follow-up document that's going to give them that comfort level for flexibility. But at the heart of it, you have to remember, it comes down to that individual student, the individual needs for that student, and then also protecting the staff. Special educators, we have medical procedures, just like nurses, that we're providing, nebulizer treatments, trach, ventilators, other medical procedures. How do we protect the teachers and the nurses and the other medical professionals? The other thing that I liked that the plan had, it talked about wearing clear masks. It's important for some of our students with disabilities, not only for them to have a clear mask, but a clear mask on their teacher. So, if you're in a deaf and hard of hearing program, you can see the facial reactions and the lips of your teacher. And the same with our students that are in some of our more severe programs. They need to be able to see their teacher's face. Even in the instruction piece, it's a good starting point. There's other things we have to look at, but of course it always goes to the individual education plan. And if we do go back to a remote type learning environment, how can we make sure we're providing that OT, the PT, the speech, everything that we can? So there's going to be many more questions, but I will tell you from my colleagues in the field, they are very happy that special education is addressed in this document, and they know there's going to be further questions and guidance that they will need. I think in special education, the other thing is, we will be looking for that guidance from MDE, but we also need to hear from the field a little bit more about some of the questions they're going to have and how to be able to open up for that face-to-face with some of these unique needs our students have. So I could go on and on about special education, but I will stop and see if there's any questions and let the rest of the panel speak. But again, it was very refreshing to be with a group of individuals that were so passionate about kids and all kids. So I just, again, want to thank the council and Brandy and the governor's office.
Well, I appreciate your voice certainly being on there, and also that you're sharing your expertise. And, that with so many center-based programs at ISDs around the state, I think there's a lot of collective wisdom, and hopefully that's going to be something that continues to come together. So thanks so much for that perspective. So we're going to go to Josh Smith, who is a high school counselor. And obviously, right from the beginning of the pandemic, I think a lot of people were concerned about student mental health. and also staff mental health. I know from a lot of counselor colleagues that I have that they do a lot of support of their own staff members as well. So what does the report contain from your perspective, Josh, and what do you think counselors are going to be looking for?
Thank you again, Wendy, for the introduction and the opportunity to be here today. I'm just going to reiterate kind of what everyone else has said already. I think that I speak for the panelists and the committee, as well as all of the principals who are listening right now. We all care about our students. I have 4 kids who are school age, so I think it's appropriate to say we love our students and we want to do what's best for them. So I think we're all in that boat together, and that's the first perspective I took away from being a part of the group, is that we care about our students and we care about our staff members and we care about our principals, and we're all in this together, and we all have the same purpose of doing what's in the best interest of the most amount of people. And so I think while there was intense discussion, I think at the same time the care and the compassion came through. So that was my first perspective. The second perspective I had was I was wondering as far as the branding or the message that we're giving out to parents. There's obviously a lot of passion on both sides of the table. And I think one of the important perspectives to keep in mind is that this is for, in one sense, a set period of time. And we talked about this as being the pandemic period. And, we're not sure how long this is going to last, hopefully not much longer. But keeping that in mind, that we're not setting precedent for the rest of education, but we're working in this unique time period. And keeping that in mind may help some people as they approach this important topic. If I could speak specifically to school counselors, I'd suggest 4 things. So I'm not sure how many school counselors are on this webinar, but I know obviously a large number of administrators are. But if I had to give 4 points for school counselors, the first one would be to familiarize yourselves with the mental health pages, pages 29 and 45. And those are going to give you 12 highly recommended steps to take. And that's going to be important to take a look at. Elizabeth, who's going to follow me, did a wonderful job of chairing that committee, did a great job of leading us and guiding us and facilitating that process. And she's going to talk in just a moment. But if you could familiarize yourself with those 2 pages, that's going to be important. The second one, which is going to be difficult, is for school counselors to work with their administrators on identifying appropriate mental health screening for students and staff members. So when we say identify screening, I think immediately we go to the physical aspect of it. But to be able to appropriately, by age level and by grade level, have a screening process in place to identify who's going to need the extra help emotionally, right? And that might, working with your administrators, is that going to be something that's formal, informal? Depending on who you are, I'm not going to be able to sit down with every student. So how does that work best? So most efficient and effective mental health screening for students. That's number 2. So familiarize yourself with those 2 pages, identify appropriate mental health screening. And number 3 would be to evaluate our current referrals for outside help. Sometimes I think we forget that it's okay to ask for outside resources and outside help, and really reevaluate our own local referral resources for mental health counseling. So in the roadmap, we can put out general guidelines, but for each district and each school, as school counselors, as social workers, to reevaluate and reassess your local referral network. So one of the main concerns that we discussed in our subcommittee, one of the teachers said, I work in an area where I don't have providers to send my students to. So that's obviously a concern. And what we can do is hopefully provide, if you're in that situation, we can provide you with telehealth counseling. And if you find yourself in that situation, I can put my email down on this, and you can reach out, and we can recommend different telehealth counseling referrals if you are in a place where you just don't find that to be an option, or you don't have what you would consider to be good, appropriate outside agency help. So I'll put that contact information down, but obviously evaluating our referral networks is the third one. And the last one, and we're not there right now, but this is going to be an important one. If the unfortunate situation takes place and we have to go back to online learning, is to have some sort of an idea in place on how to check in with students when we're not seeing them every day. So we appreciate teachers who tell us as school counselors, I'm seeing Johnny or Julie and they're struggling, and they refer them to us. And that's so helpful because we're not in the classroom. We can't have that individual attention with the students. And so teachers are some of our best resources in saying, here's a student who needs some extra attention. And if we go online, that's going to be more difficult. Same thing goes for students. A lot of our referrals come from students in class saying, this person just posted something on social media, they need help. Or I overheard them saying something. So if that's not in place, how do we continually reach out to students if we have to go back to remote? So again, we're not there right now, but we are, it's always good to have that plan ready to go. One of the things that we did discuss, I know there's a lot of important people on this webinar, but one of the things we discussed in as far as a possibility and are kind of advocating for would be something similar to OK to Say from a mental health only perspective. So OK to Say would include that, as well as school violence and bullying and things like that, but identifying a specific helpline that would be routed to us as individuals and individual districts for students who are having emotional or mental health. They need that sort of help or attention. So something like that would be helpful. And then the last thing I'll just discuss is we did talk about those awesome safe school videos that we all like to review every year, and including some trauma-informed help for teachers. So it would be one of those required videos that are so entertaining. And we would have one of those for best practices, important reminders for educators, and things like that. So again, Elizabeth did a great job. She's really done a good job of guiding us through, and those would be the 4 or 5 recommendations from a school counseling perspective.
Thank you so much, Josh. I mean, I know, like, as you referenced, I mean, we have mostly administrators on this, but I think they need to hear those things because they need to think about a plan and work with their counselors to think about how to address those issues. So batting cleanup for the council members today is Dr. Elizabeth Cashman, and I was really excited to see that you were named to this group because we had a student mental health conference, MASSP did earlier in the year, and we had representation from Trails there, and we know many schools, especially in Washtenaw County, are utilizing those services and working closely with you. So I know that you have definitely a feel of what's going on in buildings, not just out in university land or research land. So what thoughts do you have to share with us?
Yeah, thank you. And good morning. Thanks for including me. And I was really excited to be included on the advisory council as well. And it was, as others have said, a really incredible experience, very collaborative, tons of discussion. And then within our mental health and wellness subcommittee, I just want to acknowledge that I sit from a position where I can only focus on, I have my area. I focus on wellness and mental health. And I really feel for you all who are administrators who have to think about so many issues, safety protocols and budgets and transportation and learning and technology. And it feels like we have the privilege of having a very narrow focus on our subcommittee of thinking about this one topic. And it really calls to my mind this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. that you may feel that you're in a moment where you have to focus on that level 1 and level 2 of basic safety, basic needs, making sure that kids have meals and chairs to sit in and classrooms to be in if they're in person that are safe, and really thinking about physical health. But I hope that there are ways to not forget about those upper tiers of that hierarchy and remember just the key role that student mental health plays in allowing schools to achieve their aims of educating kids and helping kids grow and thrive. I also want to acknowledge that on both the broader advisory council as well as our subcommittee, I saw somebody posted the question about, they did the math and it's 95 cents per pupil. How is this really going to be possible? And I just want to acknowledge that we raised those questions every time we met, and we said, man, we're recommending a lot of things that schools need to do. Where are they going to find the resources? Some of these schools don't have counselors. Some of these schools have 0.2 FTE of a social worker. Where is the support going to come from to enable all of these recommendations? So we really do recognize the practicality and the logistics are very, very complicated. And I think one of the comments that was made to us as a committee was that this is also an opportunity to advocate for things that we have long known would be best practices and would promote an optimal environment in a school setting. So here is our chance to say, you want kids to do well despite very, very difficult circumstances, then we have to prioritize resources and support for students to promote wellness and the best mental health that we can aim for, as well as staff and administrator health and wellness. And you administrators are a very tough group of people, but you are facing so much pressure on a daily basis. And many of you are contending with your own kids at home, families at home, communities that are struggling, feelings of isolation, and really difficult work environments. So our committee, our subcommittee, is really here to try to think about the wellness of the whole school community, not just the students. So I just want to comment on a few things. Obviously, the plan, I have two screens here, so when I'm looking away, I'm not gazing off into the ether. I'm actually looking at the plan on my other screen. We talked about implementing some screening measures and tools to try to help schools identify the kids that need a higher level of support. And there are pros and cons to that, and we recognize that. It's great to identify kids that have a higher level of need and need to be connected with a support staff member or an in-school team. But it also means you're going to uncover a lot of need, and probably more need than you have the capacity to respond to adequately. So I think that the coming school year is going to require a huge amount of teamwork and leveraging of whatever resources you can get your hands on. So that may mean putting together a team in your school that can help triage kids, that can help look at the kids at the lowest level of need and just provide them maybe some printed resources, send some materials home to families, and hope that those kids can rely on coping skills and family support structures that they have in place. And then also leverage those internal and external resources to provide support to students that have a higher level of need. So where you have kids that are showing signs of depression, signs of anxiety, kids that have experienced grief and loss over the past, several months and on into the coming school year. Of course, those very most worrying kids who are at home in unsafe living environments. Those are the kids that we are all so deeply worried about. And it's going to take really careful thought to think about where can we find community-based resources, partners, stakeholders in your local area, as well as telehealth, national, state resources that can provide support to those kids as needed. And I think, the way that we approach kids when we're trying to say you have to do this activity that's really hard for you is just be prepared to mess it up and to learn from what doesn't work and then to take a next step forward. And I think that as administrators, there's no way that we're going to get it all right, you know, in the first semester of the school year. And no matter what you do in the first semester, it's probably going to change by the time we get to November and December and January. So just brace yourself for learning as you go. We felt on this commission that we were building the plane as we were flying it. I think that phrase was used several times. And I think you will feel that way too. But there is a lot of support out there to try to help connect you with resources. And I just want to add one last comment, which is that the timeline, as Brandy mentioned, for this work was so tight. We wanted to get something into the governor's hands quickly so she could provide a 10,000-foot view perspective and some guidance to you to start moving forward. But each of the subcommittees knows that there is more work to be done. And I hope that what you will see in the coming weeks and months are some more specific details talking about what are the professional development opportunities, what are those safe school, I don't actually know the name, Josh, because I'm not in the schools, but what are those short videos? What will the video look like that talks about supporting kids during this time? What is a trauma-informed school? I think that we will be continuing to work very hard over the next weeks and months to try to get you some much more practical, detailed, hands-on tools that you can use. So if you looked at this, you know, the recommendations on mental health and wellness, and you felt like you needed just a lot more practical tips, we recognize that too, and I think those next pieces are forthcoming.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to everybody on our panel. We're going to get into a couple of questions. We don't have a ton of time, but I'm going to very briefly share a window on my screen here. This is far and away the #1 question we've seen in the Q&A today. So if one of the people on the panel could address this, we have 2 different maps up. There are the different regions, and then we also have the phases map, the risk phases map from the state website. Could we get some clarification? Maybe Brandy, this is a great question for you, on the difference between these 2 maps, and if school were to open today, which phase would different parts of the state be in?
Yeah, I recognize this is super confusing, and in fact, the maps chain, like the map you see on the right, was updated on the My Safe Start map dashboard right as the press conference was starting, and so yesterday, and so there was a lot of confusion. So what you see on the right is a risk map, which basically demonstrates, you know, in pretty real-time data, because the data is updated daily, where we are seeing the highest risk levels from a short-term trend perspective. And so that being said, the map is a tool, it's a dashboard, it's something you can refer to so that people can make decisions about their personal lives based on where they live, and they can understand where they live, kind of the trends we are seeing in data, but it is not the legal document that names phases. And so I live in Lansing, and obviously we've had a huge spike due to recent events, and that's why we are scored as a phase 2 risk, which is obviously very scary. But in terms of the actual phases where we are in, those are memorialized in executive orders. And so all regions except 6 and 8 as of today are still in phase 4, and then regions 6 and 8 are in phase 5. And so it will take a change to an executive order before those actually take effect. So I'm committed to staying really close to MASSP. So if and when those executive orders change, you all will be the first to know, because obviously it's critically important for your planning.
Thank you for that, Brandy. And I think we've seen a couple of comments that the maps and the 2 different versions of the maps can be a bit confusing. So maybe we can work with you guys on coming up with a little bit better, or at least more transparent solution on what that could look like moving forward. Second biggest question we're getting, and I'm not sure which of the panelists want to field this, but it's about pupil accounting. And folks trying to plan for the fall and figure out how they're going to keep schools open when the recommendation doesn't necessarily speak to pupil accounting, especially in phases 1 through 3, when we're doing fully remote instruction. Brandy, I know you clarified in one of the questions that the pupil accounting rules under continuity of learning continue till September 30th. can somebody lay out exactly where we stand with pupil accounting from now till September 30th and then September or October 1st moving forward?
Sure. Things related to the regulatory framework that we created for EO 2020-65, a lot of them are in the School Aid Act. Because of the fiscal year, we were able to extend those pieces, including the sort of how the continuity of learning plans work as it relates to pupil accounting, through September 30th only, because that's the end of the fiscal year. Our legal counsel shared with us that our executive authorities didn't extend beyond that, and so we do recognize a solution is needed. Our first preference, our hope is to work very closely with the legislature to reach a solution that is something that the legislature feels comfortable with and the governor feels comfortable with. So they know that this is a top priority for them, and that we need a different solution for October 1st and beyond. So that is our hope. If that doesn't happen, and we are still in the state of emergency, we'll be able to revisit that later in terms of another or an amended executive order, closer to the end of September. But, obviously we recognize that's not ideal. And so we have flagged it to the legislature as as what should be the top education priority, anything related to pupil accounting, days and hours, attendance, and the use of seat time waivers, etc. We need clarity.
Brandy, along those lines, one of the things that we've thought about at MASSP is if we took some of the models that we've already seen school districts propose. For example, West Bloomfield has, thought one of their phases might be, 2 days of school, and then having Wednesday off for cleaning and the rest being online. So let's just say it was a model like that, working that through pupil accounting. And then if any other district wanted to take that plan, they know that it could already be approved, for example. So we thought it would be helpful if there were, say, 3 or 4 different plans that were just kind of generically, like if you apply for this one, it's going to be approved. Just to give people kind of like something to work from or go from. Is there any thought about how something like that might work?
Yep, happy to, I think that's what we'll be turning our attention to now that the roadmap has been released.
There are a number of issues that had questions raised about them that we simply didn't have answers to. Wanted to highlight a couple of those and see if any of the panelists wanted to jump on those. Safety drills was one, phys ed was another. There were a couple of more in there as well. I think the panel alluded to this already, that this is a start, right? That this is a set of recommendations that's going to need more work, and that a lot of these are going to need legislative input, just like pupil accounting will, in order to actually get answers. So as much as we appreciate how comprehensive this report is, it's 63 pages and it's a lot of information. There are just some questions we don't have answers to, and I think that's important to acknowledge, that there are limitations to what this group of experts was able to do, given the limitations in law and what they can possibly accomplish given the timeline. One of the questions I got here was, are there cohorting models available for the younger students, ways we could consider or districts could look at to see how to handle cohorting for younger students?
Yeah, we don't have those yet, but I will. I can certainly reach back out to some of the national consultants we worked with, Opportunity Labs, to see if they've been able to gather any of those models from other states or countries.
So we would really like to thank all of our panelists that were with us today. We will try to grab those questions that were answered in the chat and to be able to share those with people. And, we know this is going to be an ongoing conversation. So we'd like to reserve the right to recall all of you to join us again in the future as we start working through these issues. And we appreciate your service, because the other thing I fully recognize is how incredibly busy you are in your own districts and in your own positions, and trying to carve out the time to be able to serve all of the state. By being on this council. It definitely was, I'm sure, a significant impact on your time. And so I really appreciate all of you and your willingness to do that, because I think that the product shows that there were educators and people who are really committed from the field on this council, and that's fantastic. So I'd like to thank everyone for that. We do have a closing slide I wanted to share with you. I've heard from many principals that are concerned about learning gaps. And, we have the mental health screening piece that Justin talked about, and that's certainly an issue. And another issue is, what gaps are going to exist because of the pandemic learning that occurred. And so we were fortunate to be able to find a really great speaker from Massachusetts, who is a former superintendent and has been working closely with colleagues from Harvard and the Massachusetts Department of Ed on closing achievement gaps. And so we're going to have a webinar on that on August 6th from 9 to 11:30. It's a little more of a lengthy, meaty piece, but he's really going to talk about specific tools and specific ways to get that assessment and to be able to start the school year with a plan of how do we close those gaps. So we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. This is going to be recorded. We will share that recording, the link to that, so that those who maybe missed it can benefit from what the council members were able to share. And we hope that you'll be able to join us on August 6th. Thanks, everyone. We really appreciate your time.